Hey. Time for another out-of-this-world story from rSpace. A good job, nice house, and a loving wife of 6 years. But not all is how it seems. Today on rSpace, let the evidence speak for itself. Wife's affair partner tried to intimidate me, so I exposed their affair to his family and had him ousted from his own home. So, some backstory first. I, 40 male, have been married to my wife, Alyssa, 36 female, for 6 years. That's not her real name, obviously. Our life has never been something to complain about. We live in a nice house in a good neighborhood, and both have good jobs. I've always appreciated what I had and did my best to ensure that we were both always happy. But apparently, that wasn't enough for my wife. About 3 months ago, I started noticing small changes in her behavior. I didn't catch her red-handed. I just picked up on all the classic red flags. She was overly protective of her phone. I noticed one day that she'd started placing her phone screen down on the table. She was working late more often, and always seemed to be heading out with friends she didn't really used to hang out with before. Sometimes she'd giggle softly at her phone, but would refuse to share what the joke was. Once I pushed to find out what was so funny, and she got defensive and snapped at me, saying that I was being too pushy. Then there were the emotional changes. She'd always been an emotional woman, but now she seemed to swing wildly between different moods. Sometimes she was overly affectionate and would tell me how much she loved me, completely unprompted. And sometimes she was suspicious enough to border on paranoid. If I was out on errands, she might call and ask me where I was. On one occasion, she even asked me to share my location to prove it. And if she caught me smiling or laughing at my phone, forget about it. I could be laughing at a cat video on TikTok, and she'd descend on me, demanding to know what I found so funny. I realized later on that it was a combination of guilt and projecting her own infidelity, but that doesn't make me feel any better about this. For a while, I tried to rationalize it, but it was impossible. I went through a million different possible explanations, but nothing checked out. The changes were too drastic and widespread for any other reason to make sense. I was firmly convinced that she was having an affair. I'd come home to find her too tired to talk, but somehow full enough of energy to spend hours on her phone or go out. It became depressing. Along with the nagging feeling that something was seriously wrong with our relationship, I couldn't get over a lingering sense of neglect. I was the only active participant in our relationship. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to be done, and I figured out what to do when she went out for lunch one afternoon. I hadn't planned it out. The opportunity presented itself and I seized it. We'd been lounging at home on a Saturday afternoon when she went upstairs without a word and stayed there for a while. When she came down, she was fully dressed and simply announced that she was going out for lunch with her friend, Samantha. She stared at me defiantly after that, daring me to challenge her. I didn't, because I actually wanted her to leave the house. I'd been trying to come up with a way to figure out what she was up to, and now I had an opportunity. I'd just follow her and see who she was meeting up with. I knew there was nearly no chance that she'd spot me. She's not observant, and she used her mirrors much less often than she should have. So I didn't argue with her. I just said I had to do some yard work and followed her out. I made myself look busy while she got in her car. As soon as she was in a reasonable distance away, I hopped into my car and took off after her. She was already around the corner by the time I'd hit the road. I counted on my knowledge of the street layout to figure out which road she'd taken. I sped down the road, turned the corner, and sure enough, she was at the other end, ready to take another turn. I tried to keep a good distance behind her, making sure not to lose sight of her. We drove into a part of town that we never visited. Wherever she was going, it was far enough out of the way that I'd never come across her by accident. Eventually, she slowed down and pulled into a parking lot. I turned into another road so I wouldn't pass her, and found a place to park. I came back on foot and peeked around the corner. She was sitting at a table at one of those sidewalk cafes. She wasn't with anybody yet, so I just stayed behind and watched. After about 5 minutes, somebody came to join her. It was some younger guy I'd never seen before, and he kissed my wife on the cheek. She looked up at him and gave him a smile I hadn't seen from her in months as he took a seat next to her. He had his hand on her thigh, making small circles. I was floored. My chest actually tightened while I watched them talk and laugh, looking like a young couple. I can't explain it, but I felt utterly alone in that moment. The woman I'd loved for so many years was making a mockery of our marriage right in front of our eyes. I felt oddly empty inside. I forced myself to my senses. I pulled out my phone and took a few photos. When I felt like I'd had captured enough, I switched to video. It was too far away for sound, but zoomed in. It was obvious that they were laughing, flirting, and feeling each other up. I was so mad that I can't remember when exactly I decided to start walking to them. I still had my phone recording video, but I was holding it by my side, so it didn't capture much that was useful apart from sound. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't notice me until I was standing right next to them. Alyssa jerked violently in her seat like she'd been stung by a bee. Her affair partner looked confused at first, but he quickly caught on. He made himself comfortable in his chair and asked if they could help me. I didn't bother answering him. I didn't even look at him. Before I asked Alyssa if she was enjoying her lunch with her friend, Alyssa looked guilty as hell while she tried to stammer out an answer. The best she could come up with was to claim that he was the friend that she was talking about. They were just friends, nothing more. I told her that he didn't look like a Samantha. Then I pointed out that they'd been pretty handsy with each other for just friends. The guy chuckled and introduced himself as Daniel. Then he said, "You must be the husband." Apart from the fact that he'd been feeling up my wife, I found the guy irritating. He was trying his hardest to act cool and unbothered, and I wanted to show him just how bothered he should have been. Back when I was a younger man with more of a temper, I would have knocked his lights out, and then some. Now, I realized that a cheating woman wasn't worth getting into a fight over. This wasn't a matter of fighting for my woman or defending her honor. A cheating woman has no honor left to defend. I told him to shut up, that this was between me and my wife. He was pretty insulted by that. Either I'd really hurt his feelings by telling him to shut up, or he just wanted to save face in front of his affair partner with some macho posturing. He got right up in my face and told me to say that again. So I did. He shoved me roughly, and I went back a few steps, but kept my footing. He told me that she was with him now because she wanted a younger, better model. He grabbed my shirt again and told me to give up on her because she was done with me. Alyssa ran up beside him and grabbed his arm, trying to get him to back down. I felt a twinge of annoyance seeing her holding his arm like that. That gesture alone showed that she felt I was the one who needed saving. If she's told you anything about me, then you know I own firearms. What makes you think I'm not strapped right now? I wasn't, but he wasn't sure. My baggy polo and cargo shorts made it nearly impossible to tell whether I was carrying or not. I could see the gears turning in his head while he weighed the benefits of beating me up against potentially getting popped. Alyssa's eyes widened as she looked down at my waist. She was scared that I might actually be carrying. What, did she think I was going to go postal on everybody here? Well, I suppose men have completely flipped out over less. I turned around and headed back to where I'd parked my car. Alyssa followed, yapping away. She claimed that they were just friends and that there was nothing between them. I was still furious, and I asked if she thought I was stupid. She stood there staring at me for a while, probably surprised to see me so angry. I told her that the next words out of her mouth needed to be the truth, or she'd never see me again. She stood there watching me for a while. Eventually, she decided to tell half of the truth and confessed that they'd been having an affair for a few weeks. I started walking away again and said I knew it had been going on for much longer. She ran after me and admitted that it had been going on for 6 months. That was 3 months longer than I had expected. If she wasn't lying and cutting down the real number again, she said he was a guy from the gym where she took yoga classes. He was young and dynamic, and he made her feel young again, too. I didn't know how to react to that. I told her we were older and had been married a while. We had responsibilities that he didn't. It wasn't easy for us to be as spontaneous and carefree as that. She nodded as I spoke and said it was good that we were talking and that we could work through this at home. I shook my head and told her not to misunderstand me. If she found him exciting, then she could have him. When she got home, I'd have her things packed. She started begging me to think about what I was doing, but I didn't pay her any mind. By that point, we'd reached my car. I got in, slammed the door shut behind me, and peeled out. I kept my word. She got home while I was piling her stuff. Now she was angry. She screamed at me and threatened to call the police, saying that I couldn't legally eject her from the house. I threatened to send her family the videos, but she claimed I was bluffing. By the time I pulled up the video and played them back, she had sobered up. Maybe she saw just how pathetic she looked throwing herself at a younger guy like that. She packed the rest of her things into her car and said she'd come back so we could talk things through. I didn't tell her that I planned not to speak to her again. Sure enough, she came back the next day and I didn't let her in. After an hour of ringing the heck out of the doorbell, she left. It's been a week since she left, and she's been back twice. I ignored her each time. I just needed to hear someone's opinion on this. My mom and my sister have been making me out to be an a-hole for kicking her out, but my brother is firmly on my side. Am I the a-hole for kicking my cheating wife out of the house? Edit. There's been some confusion in the comments. I'm not planning on letting her back in. I've already started working on her divorce. I paid for the house and it's in my name. I'll gladly leave the house for her if that's what the court decides, but until then, it's my house. Oh, you're absolutely not the a-hole here, OP. Your wife's having a yoga fling with a guy who thinks he's an upgraded version of you, and she's surprised you're not thrilled? Ha! Keep ignoring her, let her do her little walk of shame, and let the divorce papers do the talking. Update. Thanks for all the input on my last post. I tried to read through all of the comments, and while not everyone agreed with my approach, I appreciate the perspectives. There's been a lot of new updates since my last post, so here we go. First, Alyssa kept trying to get in touch with me. She was relentless. Calls, texts, emails showing up on my door. She tried everything. I didn't talk to her, but I read her messages. She alternated between apologizing and blaming me for pushing her into another man's arms because of how predictable our relationship had been. Never mind, I work 10 hours a day to maintain our lifestyle, and that it takes two people to keep a relationship spontaneous. She maintained that it was all of my fault that she cheated on me. I couldn't believe the mental gymnastics at play, but I didn't engage. I'd had her served with papers, and I was content to stay in no contact with her. I meant it when I said I didn't plan to speak to her again. I didn't stick to it though, but with good reason, but more on that later. The issue with Daniel was what surprised me. I expected to never have to see him again, but he was stupider than I gave him credit for. The idiot was waiting on my driveway when I came home from work one day. He was leaning against his car, trying his hardest to look cool. He said I disrespected him at the cafe and I needed to apologize. I stared at him dumbfounded for a second. When I'd fully processed the situation, I just walked past him without any acknowledgement. I'd known guys like him my whole life. Insecure losers who need to assert their dominance to feel good about themselves. I also knew how to deal with that type. You ignore them. They hate when you don't make them feel like they're important, and sure enough, I'd set him off by ignoring him. He started going on about how Alyssa belonged to him and how he'd stolen my girl. He said he'd break my neck for kicking her out of her house, and that I needed to move out for her, or I wouldn't be able to handle what was coming to me. That was new to me. That was when I realized he might have an angle in all of this. My theory was that he was pushing for her to get the house so he could convince her to sell it later on. I decided he needed to be dealt with. I stood at my door and asked him if he'd threatened me on my property. He nodded with a dumb smile on his face. I asked him if that was wise when he knew I had firearms in the house. I didn't wait for a response. I just closed the door behind me. I heard his car start up only seconds after I'd closed the door behind me. I wasn't actually going for anything. I just called the police. By the time they arrived, he was long gone. But I made sure to file a report. I wasn't going to let him intimidate me on my property. Now I had a thing against Daniel. Earlier, I hadn't cared much about him, but he wasn't going to get away with trying to make a punk out of me. I couldn't find the guy on social media, mainly because I didn't know his last name. So I got in touch with Alyssa. I told her that I'd filed a police report against him and that I needed his full name to submit it to the police. She refused at first, but I told her that I was doing her a favor. The other option was that the police would come and get it from her in person, which wouldn't look good for her during the divorce proceedings. She reluctantly agreed, and I immediately went looking for him on Facebook. It took a few minutes of scrolling through similar names before I found him. Now for the next part of my plan. I opened the accounts of all his immediate family members. I was shocked to see he was married. This guy had a wife and he was harping about Alyssa being his girl? What a piece of crap. He really was just an insecure loser making himself feel big by taking something from someone else. Whatever, he could have her. I felt a distinct sense of satisfaction as I texted the videos to his family. The videos of him feeling up Alyssa, and the grainy, off-target video of me confronting them, where he threatened and shoved me. The latter was more of a voice recording than a good video, but anyone who knew him would be able to confirm that was his voice. Some of them got back to me. His mom was appalled and apologized for his behavior. His wife was a bit different. She snapped at me first, calling me a liar. After a few hours, she'd cooled down and started asking for details. I told her everything. A lot of the fallout took place outside of my view. I found out later on that they'd had an ugly fight. He'd been kicked out of his home, and his wife was filing for divorce. I learned most of this from his mom. She was a rather sweet old woman who kept apologizing for him and seemed to sincerely regret that he'd destroyed my marriage. Shame that she had such a loser of a son. I was surprised that I'd never heard back from him after that. I expected that he would come back and try to threaten me for ruining his marriage, but I think he was scared that I'd answered the door with a shotgun. Or maybe Alyssa had told him that I'd call the police, and that had scared some sense into him. I found out later on that he was having trouble finding a place to stay. He tried to stay with his parents, but his mom was mad at him for destroying his marriage. She told me she'd really liked his wife and was helping her through this tough time. After all that crap he'd put me through, it felt nice to see that Daniel was finally paying for what he'd done. As for Alyssa, our divorce is still ongoing. I can't say how it's going to turn out, but a lot is going in my favor. The house is in my name and I'm still residing in it, so it seems there's a good chance that I'm going to keep it. And Alyssa's intimate connection to a man who had threatened me on 2 occasions really didn't help her out. I found out after one of the divorce meetings that things had ended between her and Daniel. He'd come and asked her if he could stay with her, and she'd turned him away. She tried to hold it up as proof that she'd turned her back on him, but I wasn't going to let her paint herself as a saint. I asked if she'd turned him away because she knew she'd get destroyed if it came out that she was living with another man. She stamped her feet in frustration and said I was impossible, which made me chuckle a bit. Her lawyer ran up to pull her away, presumably to keep her from saying or doing something that would hurt them later. I didn't feel a bit of sympathy for either of them. They had their fun and thought they could use me as a punching bag. I feel like I punched back. Does that make me an a-hole? Maybe. A lot of people certainly thought I was after my first post. And now I feel like I might be too. And I'm kind of loving it. You're not the a-hole. He tried to bully you, and now he's paying the price. You showed him who the big dog is here, OP. Bravo. As for Alyssa, it's clear she was trying to manipulate the situation, and I think you're right not to let her off the hook. You've done exactly what you needed to do. You stood firm and made sure your interests were taken care of. Keep doing it up. Here's hoping it all works out in your favor. Do you think OP went too far? Why or why not? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for joining us today on rSpace. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. See you next time.